Good evening and welcome to Northbeat. I'm Shannon Scott. Megan Roberts is off tonight. We begin today in the Northwest Territories, where there's new concern about alcohol use in Norman Wells as the town continues to house wildfire evacuees from Fork at Hope. With safety on everyone's minds, leaders say they want to avoid creating further problems. The town's mayor says while evacuees are there, he wants the Norman Wells liquor store, which is run by the territorial government, to be shut down. So do leaders from Fork at Hope. They've asked the government to close the store, and the town's council has also passed a resolution asking for the same thing.
We only have 2 RCMP officers in town right now. So to bring in 250 people to have a liquor store open with full service, it made their life hell.
So far, the government has agreed to place a limit on sales at the store, restricting it to $200 per person per day. There's still no indication of when people from Fork at Hope will be able to return home. Now, despite the uncertainty around when Fork at Hope could be deemed safe, the Dene National Assembly is still expected to take place there in late July. Luke Carroll has that story.
Although the wildfire is less than a kilometer away from Fork at Hope, there is still hope that the community can host some highly anticipated events this summer. That includes the Dene National Assembly and the election of its chief. A spokesperson says it is still scheduled for July 23rd to 25th. George Grandjam is an evacuee from Fork at Hope. He says he's happy to hear this.
It would relax people more and keep their minds away from what's happening right now. So I think it's a really good thing that these things that are planned and they're still going to go ahead.
Dene Nation isn't the only organization planning to host an event in Fork at Hope this summer. The Sawtooth Secretariat Assembly is scheduled for early August. Charles McNeely is the chairperson and says they'll need to wait to know for sure.
I guess everybody is just playing by ear right now, waiting to see what happens with this fire.
A hand games tournament is also scheduled in Fork at Hope from July 19th to 21st. An organizer says they will have to speak with other volunteers to know the event's future. Luke Carroll, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Well, wildfires are also forcing evacuations in Labrador tonight. More than 700 people have been ordered out of Churchill Falls as an out-of-control fire bears down on the community. The CBC's Peter Cowan has the latest from the evacuation center in Happy Valley Goose Bay.
This is where the evacuees have come first in Happy Valley Goose Bay. After driving over the road 3 hours from Churchill Falls, they all registered here at the YMCA, which is now being used as a shelter. But just as fast as people showed up here, people from town also showed up to offer them an empty camper or a spare bedroom, showing them kindness in a difficult time.
Yeah, we've had some of those come from away experiences. I'm very pleased and proud to say, you know, some folks actually were showing up and I was looking at them. They were there last night. They were kind of in the background, and as families were coming in and wondering what they were going to do, and it was going to be a few hours before we set up all the mattresses that we needed here and at other shelters, they just reached out and said, do you want to come to my home?
The fire is only a couple kilometers from Churchill Falls, and the strong winds today have been whipping it up. Fortunately, it sits on the other side of the Churchill River, and as long as that is the case, they're pretty confident that the fire won't harm the community, but they don't know what Mother Nature has in store. There are some people who are still left behind in order to keep the massive hydroelectric plant running and keep the lights on, not just across Labrador, but in Quebec as well. Everyone here is anxious to find out just when they might be able to go home, and today the Premier said it's likely to be at least a couple of days, maybe even longer. They are hoping that some help from the rest of Canada may speed up that process. They've asked for 2 water bombers and other specialists to come help fight this fire. Peter Cowan, CBC News, Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador.
Well, meanwhile, in Pond Inlet, Nunavut, the territorial government says icy conditions are hampering efforts to clean up a fuel spill. Nearly 7,000 liters of diesel leaked out of a ruptured pipeline last week. Most of that went into the ocean. And while work is underway to remediate the spill, crews are being blocked by ice and snow.
The fuel that has gone in is believed to be under the ice, and due to the currents there, it's believed that that fuel has been lost and is not recoverable. From the individuals that have gone down on top of the ice, there is minimal, if any, presence at all of fuel on top of the ice. It appears to have run right underneath the ice.
The government of Nunavut issued an official message only yesterday asking residents to stay away from the area, though Hutchinson says conservation officers in the area have been telling people that for the last week. Families from Nunavut and Nunavik continue their tour in Quebec City tonight, visiting places where their loved ones were taken during the tuberculosis outbreak of the 1950s and 60s. It's a healing journey for these families, remembering the people who died away from home. The CBC's Teresa Kiatsuk is in Quebec City with the delegation. Teresa, what did the families do this morning?
Shannon, the delegates started off their morning with an opening prayer by Ittusa, Annie Ittusa from Saluit, there at the dock where patients would have gotten off the ship CD Howe. Everyone was calm. Some shed some tears there at the dock, but as they got together, you can really feel their strength, and it resonated. Once the prayer was done at the dock, they toured the spot where the ship stopped at number 94. The group formed a circle and another prayer was said. Flowers brought from Nunavut were thrown into the water. Shannon, it is scorching hot today here in Quebec City, and the group reminisced about those who were sent here and the clothes they were wearing back in the late 1940s, 50s, and 60s. They had their traditional Inuit clothing on, which is their traditional kamit, boots, and atigit, which is the traditional parka. This must have been very concerning and confusing for those children and adults who were coming off of the ship, Shannon.
I can only imagine how confusing and scary that would have been for those people, not only stepping off a ship into a place they've never been, but a climate they've never experienced, likely well overdressed and overheated. It has to have been very, very scary for them. Now, so the families saw where their family members would have arrived after being taken from Nunavut, but I understand they also went to see where their loved ones were treated.
Yes, Shannon, after touring the dock, the delegation made their way to the old sanatorium, Parc Savard. However, the group stayed on the bus and looked at the building from inside. Originally, the hospital was made for immigrants, and in 1948, Inuit were sent to Parc Savard and then to Hamilton, Ontario later on. The Parc Savard Hospital was old, built in 1897 and demolished in 1960. The foundation was kept and another building was built there. It was known as a bad and old hospital. Shannon, the delegation then headed over to the National Assembly to tour the Inuchu that was made by Nunavimio. You could see it there behind me. Each rock on the Inuchu comes from a different community in Nunavik. It was built in 2003 to establish reconciliation and recognition.
I'm sure that was also meaningful for the families. You've talked, Teresa, about the strength that they have shown throughout this. I understand they also spent some time at a cemetery today. That has to have been hard for them.
Definitely, Shannon. Unfortunately, CBC or the media did not have access to this. However, like I said, there's not a lot of information that we can say. Those graves that are there, some of them are marked and some of them are not marked, which is why Nunavut was created to try and find those answers for families who lost loved ones that were sent here and never returned home. Shannon, tomorrow they will have an unveiling of a special monument or marker in memory of all the Inuit who never had a chance to return home. The Nunavut healing journey ends on Saturday.
All right, Teresa, thank you so much for this, and we all hope that this journey does help bring some closure to these families. Thank you so much for this. That's the CBC's Teresa Kiatsuk reporting from Quebec City tonight. Well, there have long been reports of hybrid bears in the Northwest Territories, a mix between a grizzly and a polar bear. They're often referred to as either growler bears or pisleys. A new study shows us these unique creatures are rare and confirms they're all descendants of one rather strange female polar bear. The CBC's Leonie Lambrink explains how.
These two bears are both hybrids. This one here, 50% polar bear, 50% grizzly bear. This one here, 75% grizzly, 25% polar bear. We spoke to a federal scientist who actually saw this one alive 10 years ago while flying over northern Victoria Island.
I've seen thousands of polar bears in the field, but when we turned that corner into that bay and saw this kind of creamy colored polar bear with 3 little chocolate cubs, you almost had to like rub your eyes to make sure you were seeing what you were seeing.
We don't have photos of that moment, but Richardson is confident the bear in this photo is the mom he would later see with her cubs. Scientists are using a new genetic sequencing tool to test bears for hybridization. They tested samples from 341 polar bears and 440 grizzly bears from across Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. The only hybrid bears they found in all of those samples, a family of 8 bears in the Western Arctic, which they already knew about, a family that these two belong to. It was a bit of a surprise. Scientists thought they would find more.
The Western Canadian Arctic is one of the only places where we see grizzly bears crossing into polar bear habitat frequently. It does happen in other places, but it's really much more common in the Western Arctic. And so this is the place where we're thinking we're most likely to see hybridization happening. And the fact that we don't see it happening is a good indication that it's pretty rare.
Those 8 bears are also all part of the same family. A biologist who used to work for the NWT government wrote about them in 2017 and developed a family tree.
All these hybrid bears originated from one single female polar bear who mated with 2 different grizzly bears. And then those grizzly bears mated with the offspring, and kind of that's how we ended up with some of the second generation hybrid bears. So it just seems to be this, tightly closed group of bears that sort of seem to have, just for whatever reason, had a preference for something a little different.
The family tree and the corresponding tag numbers are how we know that these bears here at Nature's North Wildlife Gallery in Yellowknife are part of that family. According to NWT government data, this bear's 2 siblings haven't been hunted. If they're alive, they'd be 10 years old. Leonie Lambrink, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A name well recognized in the Yukon has been inducted into the Yukon Sports Hall of Fame. Local cross-country ski coach Gary Bailey accepted his placement yesterday, surrounded by family, athletes, friends, and other coaches. After years in sports, Bailey says sports teaches discipline, not only to the athletes, but to the coaches as well.
And it just really has helped me to be who I am and to continue to be. So I'm just saying that the story's still in progress, right? And I feel like I'm just getting going now. And guess what? We're all in it.
Well, after the speeches, attendees continued the celebrations by sharing stories and food around the fire. Bailey says he's already thinking about locations for some new ski trails. Well, generally, you'd expect anyone competing in a World Championship sporting event to have years of experience, decades even. But that's not the case for one teenager from Cambridge Bay. After taking up darts a little more than a year ago, she's now set to compete against the best in the world. The CBC's Samuel Watt has her story.
Cadence Reaver caught the bug for playing darts as a sport around February last year. Her mum asked if she wanted to play in the provincial competition in Alberta. Cadence said yes, but the morning of...
She tried to wake me up. I was like, I'm not going. She's like, you're coming. I was like, I'm not going. And then she's like, okay, whatever. They were in the car about to leave, and I got up. I yelled out my window. I was like, wait for me, I'm coming.
Fast forward 60 months and she's ranked #1 in the country in her division. That means the 15-year-old who now lives in Edmonton is off to the World Masters, where she'll be the first Inuk youth to represent Canada.
I still think it's all a dream and I'm just waiting to wake up.
She says she's got some jitters about the competition in October, but by her side will be her trusty coach, Bud Boland.
When I first met her, if you didn't approach her, you probably wouldn't get any conversation from her at all. But Cadence, to my wife and me, she's just like one of our granddaughters. That's how close she is now.
And it's people like Bud who make darts fun for Cadence.
I feel like darts is like the most random sport ever, but if you give it a shot, you'll love it. And if you go out and you play, and you meet a few people, you'll love the people around you too.
A solid pitch for others to give this random sport a shot. Samuel Watt, CBC News, Iqaluit.
Well, tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and preparations are in full swing for events across the Northwest Territories. In Yellowknife, volunteers have been busy setting up Samba Cay Plaza for the North Slave Métis Alliance's annual Free Fish Fry. Yellowknifers should arrive early for food and opening prayers starting at noon, followed by an afternoon of music and entertainment.
This is one way of attempting to give back to the community at large, at which we all belong to, and a show of what our people can do, of who we are. Right?
Events are happening across the territory. In Fort Simpson, there will be canoe races, traditional games, and a community feast. In Norman Wells, a Dene Medicine Walk is planned, followed by traditional teachings and workshops. And in Nunavut, festivities will start at noon with an opening prayer, followed by a cookout, Arctic sports, a traditional dress parade, and a jigging contest. Well, if your plans this weekend include heading out on the land, there are some fire bans to be aware of in the Northwest Territories. The territorial government has issued a region-wide ban for the Decho. That means no open flames on any private or public land. There is an exemption for Indigenous people exercising their rights. Bans are also in place across the North and South Slave regions, including in Hay River and Yellowknife. There are also bans in many territorial parks. You'll want to check the websites before heading out to see what is allowed. National Indigenous Peoples Day comes as we near the end of Indigenous History Month. Through June, we've been celebrating and highlighting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis trailblazers. Michelle Obonsawin is the first Indigenous woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and she sat down with Brett Forrester from CBC Indigenous to share some of her story.
So Bonswin, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm very well,
That's an
thanks.
easy question to begin with. So
We're starting slow.
We're starting slow. We are here to discuss Indigenous legal firsts in Canada for Indigenous History Month, and I want to start and set the stage with a number. And that number is 160. 160 is the number of years that separate the first Indigenous person being called to the bar in Canada to the appointment of an Indigenous judge to the Supreme Court. The first barrister is believed to be Simcoe Kerr, the grandson of famed Mohawk leader Joseph Brant in 1862. And you, of course, are the first High Court judge appointed in 2022. What comes to mind when you reflect on Indigenous people's efforts to see themselves reflected in the Canadian legal system?
I think it's evolution, moving forward. For me, it's perseverance, to think how there was colonialism, the impact of residential schools and day schools, because in my community it was day schools, on all of our communities, and how we persevered and we've worked very hard to get where we are today, and I think that that's something quite amazing to be celebrated.
Why do you think it took more than a century and a half for someone to be appointed to the highest court?
Well, we had the Indian Act, so in the past, Indigenous people couldn't even retain counsel, for example, without receiving punishment. So all the implications of the Indian Act and just society at large, and I think that the impact of residential schools on the education of our youth. Now finally our youth are able to go to school, celebrate and learn, and become amazing knowledge keepers.
You mentioned evolution. Certainly, things have changed in that 160 years. How do you feel Indigenous people's participation in this system has evolved over that time?
I think we've been actively involved to pursue our rights, and I think that's the best starting point that we could have, is to actually take up the reins and be in charge of our future.
What do you want your legacy to be to all of these young Indigenous people who might be looking at you?
Yeah, what is my legacy going to be? Well, hopefully it's going to be to show people that perseverance is the key to success. I'm hoping to write decisions that are going to be looked back upon in the future as having had some influence, moving the needle forward, moving the law forward, because for me, I think that's really important. We can't stay static. And I don't know, I'm just hoping to inspire our youth.
I did see one article that described you as, quote, carrying the burden of 4 centuries. That's quite a burden. Do you feel it's fair for people to place those sort of expectations and burden on you as an individual?
I think when you're a first, it's to be expected. And I always joke and say, hey, I have really wide shoulders. But is it fair? Probably not, but I think it comes with being a first.
Okay. I want to end on a personal note, if I can. Again, in your questionnaire, you describe your childhood as not a privileged one. You recalled how your father was disrespected for being First Nations and how kids laughed at your last name. How does that experience inform your approach to being a judge now?
Well, see, my father, the things that he went through as a child really impacted me growing up. So, for example, him and his brothers and sisters, they were called the Little Savages of Sunnybury, which is the street that they grew up on. And for me, that was something that was really hurtful. I didn't experience that type of discrimination other than more the laughing of my name as a child. But growing up, there were issues where I had experience, even in the last court that I sat in, where I was referred to as being Pocahontas of the North. And that was something that I found deeply troubling, and I addressed it on the spot, and I did further to address this because I wanted to make sure that no one else went through this. So I think at the end of the day, my father's experiences, my experiences growing up have touched me. I'm hoping that I'm empathetic and I'm more open when I'm looking at different issues about the impact of discrimination on individuals, for example.
Did that motivate you throughout your career?
I would say yes, because I wanted to defend those that were vulnerable, that didn't necessarily have a voice. And through the law, I think I've been able to achieve that.
How does that upbringing, I guess, influence your approach, not necessarily to judging people, but to being on the court, to projecting what the Supreme Court is to the public?
I think it's important for us to be seen as being able to relate to people. We're not on a level that's above the regular population. I think it's really important to remember my roots and where I'm from. I would see myself as someone, I hope to be humble, to remember my roots. As I said, I come from a blue-collar background, and I think all these things, they really nourish how I look at files, because I think I look at it from the view of someone who comes back from that humble background and really a different upbringing.
Back to the topic of legal firsts. You have said as a child it was your dream and desire to become a lawyer. Are there any specific First Nations, Inuit, or Métis lawyers who inspired you in the past?
Oh, definitely Murray Sinclair. So he has been a huge impact on my life. Not only as the commissioner of the TRC, but also as a mentor in the last couple of years to me. He's had a really strong impact on me growing in my legal career. I think it's been really important. Jerry Morin, who was very involved in the Cree Court, is also very inspirational to many. And I'm sure there are many others, but those are the two that I find are guiding lights in our communities.
What's the top issue you want to move the needle on at the Supreme Court?
I can't necessarily say there's an issue per se.
Sure.
What I would hope to see, just generally speaking, is the whole issue of the high incarceration rates of our peoples.
I was going to bring that up.
So we're 5% of the population, and we look at Dr. Zinger's recent statistics. About 50% of females that are incarcerated are Indigenous women. About 32% of our men are incarcerated when we're looking at the numbers. So for me, I'm hoping, not necessarily as a judge in the Supreme Court, but as a society as a whole, that we're able to move that needle forward. And when I say that, I really mean to decrease those numbers, because there's a disproportionate issue that has to be fixed. What's the solution? I'm not sure, but...
Finally, we talked about Indigenous participation in Canada's legal system over the past 160 years. How do you see that evolving? Where do you see that going over the next 160 years?
Well, for example, I've been really involved in the University of Ottawa, and they have started 3 years ago its first Indigenous law certification program. So that makes me extremely happy, because a lot of our youth and others are taking that certification. Also, when we look at the admittance rates in the different universities, there's an increase in Indigenous people that are attending. So for me, that's excellent news, because that means an increase to the legal profession of Indigenous people and all the legal traditions and the knowledge that comes with being an Indigenous person into the legal system.
All right, I think I'll leave it there, Justice O'Bonswin. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today.
Thank you, Uliuni.
Well, that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, you can always visit our website, cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Shannon Scott. Tomorrow, we'll have a special edition of Northbeat for you for Indigenous Peoples Day. I hope you'll tune in. Have a great night.
Are you ready to be entertained?
Stand-up comedy, best comedians from across the globe.
Oh, great.
An incredible lineup.
Canada.
Are you ready?
Oh.
Are you kidding me?
CBC's got the best in stand-up comedy.
That's pretty unbelievable, man.
It's a scam. It's a scam.
No f***ing way.
Ooh,
It's a bit spicy. It'll change your life.
Catch it all free on CBC Gem.
well done.
Y'all give it up. Give it up. Give it up.
I did not know what my future would look like.
The industry wasn't set up for me to thrive in.
I didn't realize how formative 25 to 30 would be.
I was so excited when they said I got to do an interview with you.
Q with Tom Power. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
You promised me that you won't look back.
You don't let them win.
I had a vision that I one day would be free again.
We are not a dying people. We are here and we are speaking.
moments that are so on trend right now. Ticket pricing, artificial intelligence, being a Swiftie. Commotion, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.